Between 5.5 and 7.4 million years ago, two volcanic masses joined together, forming the island of Raivavae. Raivavae is one of the 7 isolated islands that span over 4,000 kilometers of open ocean, forming the Australs archipelago. However, only 5 of the 7 islands are inhabited. They are Maria, Rimatara, Rurutu, Tubuai, Raivavae, Rapa, and Marotiri. Located at 23 degrees south latitude and 147 degrees west longitude, Raivavae has an east-west orientation. Its highest mountain is Mount Hiro, which is 437 meters high, on a ridge that spans the length of the island. In all French Polynesia, Raivavae is the only high volcanic island below the Tropic of Capricorn with a large barrier reef, forming several small low islets or motu. According to the last census, Raivavae has a population of almost 1,000 inhabitants, direct descendants of the Polynesian navigators who settled here hundreds of years ago and the few visitors who mixed with them. The concepts of market, merchandise, and commercial enterprise are a fairly recent introduction, and as for now, commerce is restricted to a few grocers and small bread and breakfasts. This cargo ship supplies the island once a month. The poi pounder painted on the ship's side is a symbol of the Austral Islands. Although people still actively practice subsistence farming and fishing, goods such as soda, fruit juices, cases of beer, white rice, processed sugar, and soda crackers, brand new bicycles and wheelbarrows, as well as other household goods, are imported to the island, including large water containers and cylinders of natural gas. Since there are no service stations on the island, petrol containers are brought by the barrel. This time, Raivavae's only export was taro root. Raivavae is at a crossroads. The newly constructed airport, which is both a source of income and economic stability for many homes, breaches the island's extreme isolation, but also inevitably increases outside cultural influence. Right across from the airport are the remains of an ancient ceremonial site called Marae Bomaovao. Little more than a century ago, Bomaovao had a long paved approach to what may have been a canoe landing by the lagoon, evidently accommodating a different kind of visitor from today's. During the mid to late 1st millennium AD, Polynesian double outrigger canoes explored nearly every speck of land in the spacious eastern Pacific. The Australs, the Tuamotu, and the southern Cook and Society Islands were all part of the same cultural area, and may have been part of a greater Polynesian homeland that included the Gambier and Marquesas Islands. Archaeological data suggests that most of these islands were settled between 800 and 1000 AD. However, scientists are still trying to figure out Raivavae's precise cultural origins and settlement dates. Edmundo Edwards is an archaeologist who has spent 40 years working throughout Polynesia. He first traveled to Raivavae in 1986 when he restored 2 altars for the Musée de Tahiti et ses Îles. That same year, he led a research team whose mission was to carry out an archaeological survey of all Raivavae. This feat was accomplished after a subsequent visit in 1991, recording and mapping a total of 610 archaeological structures. In this program, Edmundo will take us to various archaeological sites, explaining to us all that he has learned and expects to learn of this intriguing island culture.
Well, here we are in Raivavae with this small team composed by Lynn Danaher from Hawaii and Alexandra Edwards from Easter Island. One of the most interesting things that we were able to determine from the archaeological survey that I carried out in 1986 and in 1991 was the distribution of the 15 clans that occupied the island. We were able to determine their territories, their settlement patterns, and the resources of each one of these territories. And we also were able to determine that there were different forms of houses and marae that probably correspond to different ages. But as we didn't do any excavations at the time, we don't know how these styles evolved over time on Raivavae, because we still haven't found a site that was settled by the first people that arrived here. So what we are searching for now is early sites that will help us develop the culture history of Raivavae.
Raivavae's ancient population must have greatly affected its 16 square kilometers of land. It is a well-known fact that humans in Polynesia caused dramatic changes in island ecosystems after settlement. While the missionaries introduced goats to the island, early settlers introduced pigs, rats, and chickens. This combined with the introduction of crop plants and the slash-and-burn cultivation practices of ancient Polynesians invariably affected the natural distribution and habitat of native species.
The vegetation that we have in Raivavae today is very different from the vegetation that was encountered by the first Polynesian settlers. The distribution of plants and the swamps and everything were very different. And the Polynesians, the first thing they did was introduce probably around 30 different species of plants and varieties, such as sugarcane and breadfruit and taro and yams and bananas and many other things. And for this they needed to clear land. And to clear land, what they did was by slash and burn. So they would just cut down part of the forest, burn the forest, and then plant there. The swamps they used for planting taro, and surrounding the swamp they had arboriculture. They planted great amounts of breadfruit in the slopes coming down from the hillsides, and bananas and other plantains further up at the foot of the hills. And the whole island gradually started to change, and as population started to grow, of course land became scarce. And they ended up by building some forts on top of the mountains that had palisades, and by that time probably a great amount of the wood was gone. We know that for many years they were trading with other islands. Probably the construction of boats and other things to travel off the island must have consumed also great amounts of resources. And it arrived to a point in which, as the population grew, they needed more and more wood. And this also brought internal strife as the population grew, because the land was limited. And they ended up by building several forts in which the people were living there at the beginning of the 1800s. And these forts were surrounded by palisades. It must have meant cutting down great part of the forest that remained on the island.
In the 18th century, explorers to Raivavae observed many trees growing along the coast, as well as far inland, halfway up Raivavae's steep mountain slopes. Today, the natural forests have recovered, but with newly introduced species. Casuarina and coconut grow all along the shore, while tea and wild hibiscus grow further inland aside other introduced species, such as coffee trees. Fruit trees flourish in the lush gardens of private homes. Between 1862 and 1902, Raivavae's last paramount chief, the Ehuapufatu III, wrote down his family history to claim land titles before the French authorities.
Titles and privileges are recorded in the oral tradition,
and they were legitimized by reciting the title holder's genealogy. In Tehuapofatu's ancestral book, named Pukatupuna, in which he describes all his ancestors, he then explains how Tiari and Taniau, two of the three sons that Maui had, god Maui, this is the famous god of all Polynesia, became the first settlers of Raivavae. Later, Raivavae was divided into 15 territories that extended from the island's dorsal range all the way to the outer reef. The territories were divided into two opposing polities, one occupying the island's east side, the other the west. One belonging to the descendants of Taniau, the other one to the descendants of Tairi. What we discovered in the survey is that Raivavae's settlement pattern can be easily understood by dividing the island into 4 zones with just 2 sets of environmental conditions. First, the coastal plain of Rairua and Bayuro calderas, which have the best natural resource potential, and secondly, small swamp areas on the coastal plain inhabited by newer settlements claiming poor resource areas.
Settlements consisted of an agricultural complex with one or more ceremonial structures or marae, and a chief's household with its dependencies. The same as elsewhere in Polynesia, the senior male with the closest direct descent to the founder of each territory was the highest chief of his community. The chief's brothers and cousins, with their wives and children, formed a task unit that owned and worked the land. The chief was responsible for his tribe's well-being and advocated his family group's demands. Chiefs controlled all productive activities with sanctions called rahui that restricted certain harvests or stipulated where and when certain fish could be caught, and they received special offerings such as the fruits of the new harvest. The chiefs also owned status goods, such as highly decorated headdresses and ornaments like this necklace from Raivavae. Other status goods included beautifully carved headdress and stools. Domestic utensils included shell scrapers, water vessels made from dry gourds and calabashes, basalt poi pounders, and several kinds of woven floor mats and baskets made from pandanus leaves.
Here I'm on a terrace cut into the hillside in the interior of Bayuro that was a house site. And in ancient times, most of these house sites were located on the foothills in the interior of the calderas of Bayuro and Rairua, because those were the best geographical locations for settlement. You had a big swamp that could be converted into a pond field to plant taro, and on the sides surrounding this, you had very good alluvial soils where you could plant bananas and other crops. Sometimes you might find up clusters of up to 6 or 7 terraces together. Some houses were very large because they lived in these extended family groups, and I've seen and recorded houses here in Raivavae that had up to 60 meters in length and that could have lodged of over 100 people. Status and wealth determined the size of the platform or terrace upon which the structures were built. Whether or not they had coral curbing or uprights or pavement depended on the status of the person that would occupy the site. The chief's terraces had a commanding view over all his territory and the outer reef, not only as an expression of rank and prestige, but also so he could survey everyday activities such as crop cultivation and lagoon fishing.
Fishing was and still is one of the main occupations of the people in Raivavae. In the past, they had fishhooks of all sizes and shapes, trawling gear, spears, and many kinds of nets and weirs to exploit the ocean and the great variety of sea life in the clear waters of the lagoon, as well as the dark, deep, benthic waters. Many still use the traditional canoes of their ancestors. Notwithstanding the many tools they used for fishing in the past, the nut of this fruit was particularly important.
One of the trees that you find growing in every marae or in close surrounding areas is the Barringtonia tree, fish poison tree. It has this fruit that has an almond inside that you cut in half, then you mash the almond and you collect the fluid, and this you put it in a gourd, then you swim out into the lagoon, and as you disperse this in the water, you will have a white cloud that stuns the fish. And they used to use this to catch fish in the past.
One of the things that most attracts one's attention in Raivavae is the presence of these colorful outrigger canoes. Made out of wood and handcrafted, Raivavae's outriggers are mainly used for fishing and are the same ones that have been made here for generations. Making a canoe involves many hours of work, from finding a tree that's large enough, cutting it down, carving it, and then hollowing it out to make the hull. Although electric chainsaws are used for part of the work, a lot of the process is still carried out by hand. We were told it takes about 3 months to finish a canoe. We saw another canoe being made in the traditional manner where the canoe parts are cut and sewn together and then caulked. The canoes we saw being made were very large, and those who made them were very proud of their work, as well they should be. Outrigger canoes are not only used for fishing though, and new fiberglass personal outriggers are not uncommon on the island, as paddling is a very popular sport throughout Polynesia. These modern outriggers are sleek and colorful, and may be personalized with graphics. There are a variety of canoes on the island, but traditional outriggers will be around for a long while, since not surprisingly, the most popular team sport in Raivavae is paddling. Each district has their own men's and women's teams, and they practice for hours every afternoon, every day, all year for an island-wide competition that takes place in July. There are also other competitions like singing and dancing, but nobody works harder than the outrigger canoe clubs. The only restriction is that the large outrigger canoes used in the competition must be of traditional manufacture. In the past, Raivavae's economy was subsistence-based, and although fishing was very important, agriculture was even more so. The ancient people of Raivavae cultivated fruits and vegetables introduced by the island's original settlers. Those still cultivated today include ape, which grows wild on swamp banks and occasional streams. Raivavae has 8 varieties of banana, most of which are planted near habitation sites. Locals hang them from sticks or wooden frames in the lagoon to keep them scavenger-free. Only 3 varieties of breadfruit are cultivated in Raivavae today. In the past, they were planted in the inside slopes of the volcano's calderas and shallow inland valleys. This is the most common coconut variety, the same as the one that grows all along the coastal road. There are only 2 varieties of sweet potato here. This one was brought from Rapa in the early 1900s. It is cultivated extensively in the district of Anadolu since the soil there is not suitable for taro cultivation. D, which is related to sugarcane, may be found growing wild or near household sites. Raivavae's 4 varieties of sugarcane are still cultivated near residential sites.
This is one of the large taro plantations. Taro is the main staple of Raivavae, and it used to be also in past times. And they used to cultivate all the swamps that are on the coastal plain, and also the swamps that formed in the interior of the calderas. They also built pondfield terraces on the side of the hills in the interior of the caldera, and they would deviate water from a stream to the highest terrace, and there it would flow down to the lower terraces, carrying new soil and nutrients. So it was a very effective way of planting taro. Today, only about 30% of the Asian swampland is cultivated.
Undoubtedly, the most important of Raivavae's cultivated crops was, and still is, taro. Raivavae has 13 varieties of wet taro and 1 of dry taro. Locals still work the taro the same way they did in the past, creating raised mounds surrounded by water.
Well, we do not know much about how religion used to operate in Raivavae in pre-contact times, but probably it operated similar as all the rest of Eastern Polynesia. It must have been organized by rank, and it must have been as complex as in Tahiti and the other islands. Well, oral tradition mentions the name of several of the major gods, like Tangaroa, Hiro, Maui, Tane, Rongo, Tu, that are the same gods that you find in all this area. And we know that they used to make offerings to their ancestors in the marae, and that there were specific individuals that acted as priests, and probably the traditional chiefs also had an important role in these ceremonies.
All Eastern Polynesian ceremonial structures share common features, though the arrangement themselves vary from island to island. The term marae refers to an open space or meeting ground used for secular and religious purposes, usually located in the center of a settlement, although some were established in remote locations to claim ownership over a particular resource. All marae have a central court and a place where statues or large stones representing deified ancestors were placed. This was called ahu. The same as the language, the marae and statues are unique to each island, but all share a common origin, which is easily recognized.
Here we are in a structure that's called a malai or marae. And marae or malai is a word that comes originally from Western Polynesia, from Samoa and Tonga. And it was an open space or a meeting ground where the tribe or the group would congregate to celebrate secular rites or sometimes religious rites. According to ethnographic information, it was the high-ranking chiefs that were in charge of building the marae for their own communities. And as the marae was a status symbol, it represented the status and the wealth of the community. During the archaeological survey of Raivavae, we've recorded 82 structures that we call marae, that were shrines and altars where they would honor their ancestors. This one, named Puha Puha Tiare, is the most important one of the Baiuru caldera. And it has this paved alleyway that leads up to a central entrance that is a little bit off center. And it has these uprights on both sides of the alleyway. Behind the paved court, there was a terrace that was cut into the slope side. That was where the god house was located. Sometimes the court was connected to the god house by 2 or 3 different entrances. One was used by the chief, others by the warriors, and the other one by the commoners.
Apparently, a few of Raivavae's ceremonial structures were used to read astronomical phenomena. One of these is Marae Unurao.
This is the largest marae on Raivavae, and it's oriented on a north-south axis. And it was built by a chief named Tautini in 1790. And it was destroyed 100 years later by the converts to Christianity. The custom to orient some of the religious structures in Polynesia towards the rising of certain constellations of stars was quite common. And you find this all the way from Easter Island to Western Polynesia. And this was because certain constellations like the Pleiades used to mark the times for harvest, the commencement of the year, the times for planting, and also the offshore fishing season. It has a pathway that goes all the way down to the ocean, and when you landed, you would walk up this avenue that was flanked with upright slabs to arrive here to this enclosure. And then behind this enclosure was a big god house that extended all that area over there. And behind the god house, there was an inclined ramp that led up to an ahu. That was where offerings to the ancestors were placed. On top of the ahu, there were 4 large statues made out of red scoria. Unfortunately, they were destroyed by the converts, but fragments of them are now in the Bishop Museum in Hawaii.
This is Marae Mauna Oto, formerly known as Oahu, also restored in 1986 by Edmundo and his team. It took 25 workers 5 days and 3 ships to leave it as we see it today. In most cases, a high-ranking chief, the head of a lineage, was responsible for building and naming the marae. The enclosed court measures little more than 24 meters long, and like many marae and Raivavae, it has a width-to-length ratio of 3. Before restoration, all the slabs with one exception had fallen, and the site was covered by a dense growth of wild hibiscus. This tomb belongs to the marae's chief and his extended family. Most pre-contact tombs in cemeteries are found by marae or house sites, while later tombs are sometimes found in more isolated areas. Tombs with plaster remains, or such as this one with a stone used to make hats, indicate these were built more recently.
Here we are in Marae Te Vairoa, one of the latest maraes to be built in the valley of Baiuru. It's way up behind the taro fields in the interior of the valley, practically next to the crest that divided this valley from the next one. And it belonged to a very small lineage, but it is an extraordinary altar because it had 25 statues. Stone statues made out of red scoria, not very tall, about 3 feet high, but they were all broken after they converted to Christianity. And I don't know if they were goddesses of creation or deified ancestors of the different tribes and lineages. But most of the stone figures of Raivavae are female. Some of the statues were standing in alignment in front of the wall of the altar. And here we can see remains of the feet of one of these statues. And there are several others here in this alignment. And the other statues were placed on top of the tombs. The maraes today are covered by an incredible amount of vegetation, especially this one that is very far inland and sort of an area that very few people explore today. Most of the maraes are built on terraces that are cut into the hillside, and the upper terrace you have a lot of tombs. Most of the tombs have these uprights, basalt prisms, pieces of coral, and according to oral tradition, this was one of the last maraes to be built. It was commanded by the chief of this valley, so probably it could have been built around 1790s, just before the arrival of the missionaries.
Raivavae's stone statues, or tiki, were mostly carved from red tuff, as red was the color of sacredness. The stylized form of Raivavae's statues reflect an evolution in the representation of the human figure, and although statues varied in size and shape, they share a number of common features. Unfortunately, less than 10 marae of the 82 surveyed by Edmundo still had statues, since most of them were destroyed after the arrival of Christianity. This is the only full statue that remains in Raivavae today.
On the 5th of February of 1775, the crews of the Águila and the Jupiter, a Spanish expedition to the South Seas under the command of Tomás Gallegos, sighted for the first time Raivavae. On the following day, they intended to land in this small beach here in Mahanatoa. But they didn't do so because there were so many islanders who congregated on the beach that the Spaniards got scared. So the encounter was very short. The people from the island were interested in finding out the name of the captain of the ship. That probably indicates that they had heard about Europeans coming into other archipelagos in this area. On the other hand, the Polynesians, interpreters the Gallegos had, found that the language was very similar to Tahitian. And they must have known that the people of Raivavae used to travel back and forth between these archipelagos. The thing is that on the following day, once they left Raivavae, and the Spaniards placed the name of Raivavae on a world map, the future of this island changed forever.
In 1817, sandalwood was the East Pacific's main commodity, but whaling had already become an important economic activity in Polynesia. By 1811, there were nearly 300 whaling ships working various grounds all across the Pacific, encompassing most of the Pacific islands. Numbers multiplied in a short time, and whaling ships proliferated the Pacific from the coast of California to Japan in the north, and from southern Chile to Tasmania in the south. In 1846, there were approximately 900 whaling ships in the area. Whaling ship logbooks mention Raivavae as early as 1836. Tahiti was undergoing great transformations at the time. In 1813, European missionaries publicly destroyed many Tahitian statues. The following year, Bomade II took control of Tahiti. He improved conditions for European commerce in Polynesia and enacted the Christian laws of 1815, where Tahitians abandoned traditional rituals and replaced them with Christian prayer. Bomade II became head of the Tahitian church and the new state. This concentration of power earned him prestige and authority, which he used to bring peace to the Society Islands.
In 1812, Captain Forger, notoriously the dishonest sandalwood trader who was operating in this part of the Pacific, arrived to Raivavae. He then kidnapped some of the chiefs of one of the largest districts of the island, and he asked for a ransom that amounted to 1.5 tons of sandalwood. To be able to do this, they had to go and cut down most of the trees that still remained on the outer islands. But acts like this became more and more common from then onwards. And at the same time as the population had grown and now the resources became scarcer, there was a tremendous amount of animosity going between the different groups, and this led to war. Seeking protection of a sovereign nation and impressed by the Society Islands' harmony after conversion to Christianity, it seems Tubuai and Raivavae summoned the help of Pomare II. So in October of 1819, Captain Lewis, an American whale-turned-sandalwood trader, agreed to take Pomare II to Tubuai and Raivavae in exchange for a large amount of Raivavaean sandalwood. As soon as he arrived, Pomare II separately met with the paramount chiefs of the Natirona and Hamuri clans that were at war with each other over a land dispute involving Raivavae opposing polities. The Hamuri chiefs told Pomare that his clansmen were all sheltered in a fort in Hatuturi. Well, the next day, Pomare II negotiated peace with the chiefs, and the same as in Tubuai, they ceded control of their island to His Majesty.
Bomade II returned to Tahiti, leaving a Tahitian missionary in Raivavae. In the next 2 years, all but 25 of Raivavae's 800 or so inhabitants had converted to Christianity. Not fully aware of the implications of the island's cession to Tahiti, Raivavae became French territory when Tahitian Queen Bomade IV signed her rights over to France in 1861.
It is very difficult to determine the pace in which things changed after they converted to Christianity. We know that traditional religion was abandoned, mariahs were destroyed together with the statues. We know that the missionaries enacted a new moral code in which polygamy, tattooing, and dancing was forbidden. The Bible had been translated previously into Tahitian, so of course Tahitians started replacing the local language. And from that moment onwards, as the missionaries controlled all foreign trade, they became the main agents of acculturation and change. The newly arrived Tahitian missionaries started encouraging the building of temples and houses with lime-plastered walls. And here I'm sitting on the remains of the first Christian temple built in Baiuru. It is only a few steps away from Marae Puapuatiare, one of the most important Asian altars of this part of the caldera. And here we can see some remains of the plaster that is appearing between the soil. And what they would do, they would make sort of a thatch wall, and then they would cover it with this plaster. So here we can see the imprints of the reeds that were supporting the wall. To make lime, they had to go to the outer islands or to the reef, and they had to get big chunks of coral that they would bring back, and then they would build a deep hole, just like an earth oven, and they would have to cut large amount of trees, mainly the casuarina trees that grow around the coast of the island that produce intensive heat. And then they would pile all the lime on top of it and burn it like an earth oven. And this way, gradually, all the architecture of the island started to change. And as it changed, there was a greater demand, of course, for European goods. And at that point in the history of Raivavae, something devastating occurred.
Polynesians had little resistance to the infectious diseases carried by Europeans. In April 1829, the missionaries recorded that a highly infectious fever had become an epidemic. It had spread from Tubuai to Raivavae with devastating effects on both islands, killing 75% of their populations. Whole communities were instantly affected. During the first few days, entire families were buried in communal graves. In all the islands it was the same. After the epidemics, the few remaining survivors lived in a different world. Urged by the missionaries, islanders left their traditional houses and built new European-styled ones near the new temples. The missionaries helped locals build piers in front of the new settlements to improve trade and delivery of supplies. The introduction of tools of modern technology ended with the ancient tools and their craftsmen. Traditional skills were no longer valued. Cotton replaced bark cloth, and the women were taught how to make hats that were used for Mass on Sundays, and which are still used in Raivavae and other islands today. Although there are a few Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Mormons on the island, the primary faith remains the one taught by the London Missionary Society. Attending service is the main event of the week, and both men and women literally wear their Sunday best for the service. But the women's hats, which they handcraft themselves, are most striking. Each village has its own temple, however, two of them share the same pastor, Mrs. Vanina Maitui. Most of Raivavae's social activities are separated by gender. This is actually very effective for the enthralling chorus of voices for which Polynesia is so famous. Sunday service in Raivavae is a truly glorious experience. One can only imagine the enthusiasm that must have accompanied the very different set of religious activities practiced in the past.
The Christian temples of Raivavae today are what the Asian marae were to the ancestors of the present-day worshippers. Like the ancient marae, the building itself represents all the communal greatest physical, material, and aesthetic labor, and it gave pride and status to the community that built it. Raivavae temples today are built by the whole community, by the effort of everybody that lives in each one of these villages, and they reflect the leadership and status of the community. And religion, like it was in the past, today permeates every aspect of modern-day life, all social behavior and events.
One of the island's most entertaining but also time-consuming activities is to raise funds for the church. Food in Raivavae is still prepared using the tools of the past. The tea root is boiled or baked and then peeled and pounded with stone pounders. The pulp is then placed in mesh bags to extract the juice by twisting a pair of sticks through both ends. This liquid can be used to make honey, but also it can be fermented to produce a potent liquor similar to clear brandy. In this case, the final product will be sent to Tahiti and Tubuai to sell and raise money for the church. The taro root is used in a variety of ways on the island, but one of the local all-time favorites is a preparation of fermented taro. The preliminary preparation is similar to that of the tea. The taro root is first boiled and peeled and then pounded to a smooth pulp. This takes a lot of time and both men and women participate in the preparation. The taro is pounded until it reaches a doughy consistency. This substance is then kneaded with a periodic dab of water until it absorbs enough air to become light and fluffy. The trapped air makes the taro ferment and swell up, giving the taro a slightly acidic flavor, both of which increase as days go by. The final product is then wrapped in various layers of tea leaves, which are then tied at the top to create a flexible, tidy package. Everyone participates in one way or another, and these gatherings are the island's main social activity. Pigs have long been a symbol of status and wealth to Polynesians. The fact that they carried pigs to all the islands they settled with the exception of Easter Island reflects their importance in Polynesian society. Polynesian pigs originated in mainland Southeast Asia and virtually disappeared when the much larger wild European pigs were introduced in post-contact times. In Raivavae, pigs are all domesticated and are fed coconut year-round, so they are very fat and their meat is considered a delicacy. Like it was in the past, a communal house is located near the community's religious center. This is where the actual feast and all the activities we have seen take place. The structure, usually adjacent to a large open court, has a kitchen and a protected area where people can eat, work, and sometimes even dance and sing. Many things have changed in the past 200 years, but some still stay the same. Old meets new in this backyard in the middle of the island. Since all the ancient structures are located in private land, it is not unusual to find a new house built right next to a marae. Raivavae is indeed at a crossroads where the past and present meet, and it's time to make an important decision. This man told us this stone, once part of a marae, was still considered tapu or sacred, even though it was now inside a shed. People take good care of their houses here on the island. Every yard has a perfect lawn and decorative shrubs and flowers all around. Flowers are not restricted to flower pots either. They abound on the sides of the roads too. The same as it was in the past, a beautiful home is something to be proud of, and houses in Raivavae are beautiful. They are very well cared for and sturdy, and some are quite ornate. Homes have electricity, running hot and cold water, and most also have a satellite dish for cable TV, which brings us to the important utilities and services present on Raivavae. Most of these are found in Rairua, Raivavae's main district. There you can find the Telecommunications Bureau. There's also a post office, which covers most of the island's postal needs. In addition, it is the island's only internet service provider and the only way to get and send money to and from the island. Raivavae also has a medical center with modest yet modern facilities. There's also a local police force, complete with what is equivalent to a coast guard. And no town can do without an official records office to keep a complete registry of the births, deaths, marriages, land titles, and other important records. Each district has its own church, elementary school, and city council, although the city council of Rairua is the largest and most important one of all. Construction doesn't cease, although it may stand still at times. Raivavae is beautiful, not just the people, but the island itself. The unique rock formations on the coast, the long mountain that runs the length of the entire island, the white sand beaches of the islets, and the crystal clear waters and rich turquoises and greens of the lagoon. Raivavae is beautiful at a grand scale, but also in countless smaller, more subtle ways. And yet even in these small, beautiful things, one can sense the pressing urgency of the decision Raivavae must make, in these beautiful pink flowers growing by the side of the church in Anatonu, and another flower which has fallen onto a marae. Of course people will come to this beautiful island, and given the choice, who wouldn't? Although there are still no restaurants and bars, and no ATM machines on the island, there are small tourist facilities ready to accommodate the small yet growing influx of visitors, and one can only anticipate that these will multiply in the years to come. Many people on the island are already getting ready to meet them.
Surely, as everything changes, Raivavae will also change. But what will change, and the rate of the change, depends on the people of Raivavae. Now we have the airport, it's here, and surely the astounding beauty of this island and its people will attract tremendous amount of tourists to this island in the future. So I hope that when these people come here, they'll be able to encounter an island in which the people feel proud of their heritage, of their past, of their altars, of all those incredible feats that were done by their ancestors, those voyagers that went from Raivavae to different lands, all the way to Raiatea, those seafarers of the past.
This is the elementary school of the district of Anatonu. Behind the sign with the name of the school, there's a bulletin board with pictures of a class trip to the airstrip when it was under construction. There are notes with facts about the airstrip and pictures of the children and teachers that went on the trip. There are a great many questions regarding Raivavae's future. Some of the most important ones concern Raivavae's children. There is no question that they are in good hands, but what will they learn about Raivavae? What will they want to learn, or rather, what will catch their interest? What will they find engaging about their past history? Who will they become? And of course, the most important question of all, where will they lead Raivavae in the future? Most of these questions must remain unanswered for now, although it doesn't hurt to start thinking about them now. Now is a good time, before it's too late.